Okay, and it's okay, Allie, if we still do some interactive stuff, right? Even though
Yes,
recording. Okay.
definitely.
All right, because I am all about making this a conversation if possible. I do a lot of kind of circle groups where we all sit in a circle and we share from our hearts and we have this incredible heart space. And so that's something that's really important to me. So, first of all, just thank you so, so much to every single one of you for being here. I feel honored that you would give of your time and your energy to participate in this circle. And even though we're not sitting in a circle, I would like to pretend that we are. There are a few things about the circle that I find just really profound. One of those is that when we sit in circle, there is no hierarchy. There's nobody that's ahead or behind. Everybody is equal in a circle. And that is really important to me. So as we talk through these things tonight, and as I will be leading us in some ideas and just some maybe teaching some new concepts, but really I would like this to feel like a circle. And so if you have anything that you want to share or any questions that come up, please don't wait. Do not wait for a pause. This is a conversation that we're all having. And so if something comes up and you feel like you have an idea that you want to share, or you have a question that you want to ask, please feel free. And you can always just kind of do this and I will see you because I have my gallery view going on. So please know that. The other thing that is so important about sitting in circle, and it's the part that just makes it so yummy and also very powerful, is that all of our hearts are facing one another. And so we actually create this incredible heart space all together. And we get to give and we get to receive in that way. And so even though we are doing this online, it is still possible for us to create that exact same space. Um, so that's what we're doing. So um, anyway, so thanks again for being here. Allie, thank you for that kind introduction. I've known Allie for some time now and just have been so honored to be able to work beside her. She's such a caring and sincere leader. And she and Erin together create these incredible events. So it'll be really nice when we are all able to participate in those together. But I'm also really grateful that we're still able to connect this way because this is pretty isolating. This time in all of our lives is pretty isolating, and so to be able to come together and share with each other and get to know each other, even though it's online, is still really powerful. But I'm grateful to Erin and for Allie for the good work that they do and the way that they pull these things together. So I'm honored to be here. So how many of you have ever heard of an end-of-life doula prior to this, or a death doula? No. So it's pretty interesting because I've been working with Image Reborn for several years now. I would say maybe three, Allie, 3 years. And yeah, 3 or 4, it's been a minute. And when I first came to work with Image Reborn, it was as because I was doing sound healing. So I play crystal bowls. And if any of you know Susan Basmajian, who leads the yoga, they had asked me to come and play my sound bowls while Susan led yoga. And so we worked as a team, and I did the sound and she did the yoga. And I had told the person who had invited me to come and work with Image Reborn that I'm an end of life doula. And I remember this person said to me, don't tell the women that that's what you do because it's going to freak them out. And I totally understood that. However, it was actually at a stage 4 retreat, and it was after a yoga class with this yummy sound. And I mentioned that I do end of life work and that I'm an end of life doula. And the women who were participating in that group were very interested in hearing more about it, learning more about it. And so it was a really beautiful evolution of, moving from let's not say anything about grief or death or dying because, that might not be welcomed to actually let's have some conversations that are inclusive, that can answer some questions, and that can actually create this really powerful support system for all of us, right? So that's kind of how this has evolved, and that's how we have come to tonight. And tonight is really special because this is really the first time that I have spoken about what I do with end of life work, what I do with grief work, and what I do with joy work. And they all go hand in hand. They all, joy, grief, life, and death are all so interrelated and so interconnected. And we're going to talk more about that. Um, so anyway, again, as I'm sharing, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate. Or if you have anything to contribute, just please speak up. Yes, please, Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's nice that you did mention it in that setting and found that people were receptive to the conversation, because the reality is we think about it.
Right.
It comes to mind, no, you don't want to think that, something's going to happen very soon, but we think about it. So at least for me, to have a space to hear more or share more of what I'm thinking about without going down a rabbit hole or freaking out your friends and family is really supportive. So
Good. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's kind of what we find, right? Oh, yes. Yes, Charlie.
I agree with her. The hardest thing really is to try and talk about those emotions, because everyone says you have to stay positive.
Yeah.
You can't think about, the negative or it'll happen.
That's right. And really, what they're saying is, I'm terrified to explore my own relationship with grief and death. So I'm going to project it onto you. I'm going to ask you to be scared too, right? Even though you clearly you have a balanced approach to it, right? Because you want to talk about it, and it's it really runs the gamut. This is a situation that comes up in hospice care. It comes up in any kind of end of life setting where some people would like to talk about it. Other people, most people, don't want to talk about it because it's such a shunned topic in our culture and in our society, and there hasn't really been Uh, a lot of space created for this type of conversation. Um, so I feel like it's really important. So thanks for agreeing, because I think it's really healthy and I think it's empowering. And that has actually been my experience, is that's exactly what happens when we do create space to talk about these subjects. So as Erin, I'll just give you just a really brief history of kind of how I came to do what I do and my own kind of personal background, and then the work that I currently engage in. Um, so a friend of mine who started a movement called Death Over Dinner, his name is Michael Hebb. He wrote a book called Death Over Dinner. But before he wrote the book, like years before he wrote the book, he started this idea of just, let's get together. I'm going to have my friends over. We're going to have dinner together and we're going to talk about death. Nobody's dying. Nobody had just died. It's just we never talk about it. And it's the one thing that is for certain for every single person on this planet. I mean, that's the biggest irony of all, right? Is that it is the great equalizer. It's not like, oh, some of us will, some, no, it is, we will all die. And that's why it's so ironic that it is so, especially in the United States, especially in our culture, that there isn't really space to talk about it. And so this friend of mine, he kind of, he's the first person and the only person I've ever heard say this, but he coined this phrase that I love. And he said, whether we are aware of it or not, we all have a death genesis. And it's where our relationship with death began. And he said, if we take a moment and we really go, allow ourselves to kind of go back to just all the points in our lives, we're able to pinpoint our own death genesis. And there might be some people who haven't begun that journey, but most of us have. And for me, my death genesis began when I was 16, and my brother, who was 2 years older than me, died in a car accident. And I remember when I found out that he had died, I felt incredibly calm. And that was the first thing that let me know that I process death a little bit differently than a lot of people, especially the people in my family, because nobody was really calm. People were really upset. And I for sure had a good, healthy grief journey through that process, but it wasn't until a little bit later. So the idea of death I seemed to be a little bit more comfortable with it. And so that was my death genesis for me. And years later, in 2011, my beloved stepmom died from rheumatoid arthritis, and I watched her suffer for so many years. And I just remember watching this beautiful woman, and I could not figure out why in this modern day she had to suffer alone and be in so much pain. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And like I said, she died in 2011, and I just was on a quest to figure out why this was the case. And in 2015, I saw a TED Talk by a man named B.J. Miller, who is a palliative care physician. And if you don't get all this stuff, don't worry about it. We're going to send out an email after that'll have all this stuff, but I'm actually going to make a list here. B.J. Miller. What else did I say? Oh, Michael had. Anyway, and if I forget, you can always email me and ask me. But B.J. Miller is a palliative care physician, and his TED Talk, he's also he lost both of his legs in an accident when he was 19 years old and went on to become a physician. So he had been on the side of being a patient and then being on the side of being a physician. And his big, I guess, message and mission in this world is learning how to be with each other at the end of life. And especially in the medical community where, there's so much programming around curing. And his whole concept is, yes, let's do that, but also let's create space for wholeness and wellness and comfort and love and just being tended to without being treated. And so it's kind of this was in 2015, and since then palliative care has really grown. But unfortunately, palliative care and hospice both kind of have these misconceptions, which are that you have to be 1 foot in the grave kind of to have either one. And that's a whole other talk that we could do, and it doesn't really seem relevant, but it's not true. They're both just situations that that really do care for the human being, the whole human being. So, so in 2014, I knew that I wanted to work with end of life, and in 2015, I became a certified end of life doula. And what is a doula? The easy way to really define what an end of life doula is that we are the non-medical support system for people who are at the end of life and their families and their loved ones. And so we help individuals, we do everything from helping an individual draw up their advance directives. We assist them in connecting them to people who can help them with their end of life, will and testament, all the end of life documentation. But more importantly, equally importantly, I should say, maybe more importantly, is that we provide emotional support for the individual, and like I said, and their families. And we are trained to act as a liaison between both. So, if there is a person, to your point, Charlie and Lisa, if there's a person who really wants to talk about end of life and their family's like, no, we are not comfortable, we don't want to talk about it, a doula will come in and kind of mediate that conversation, or maybe even have a conversation with the family alone, have a conversation with the person who would like to discuss it, and then just try to create a safe space where it can begin to be talked about. And a lot of times it really just takes the courage to just kind of listen, you know? It's not, oftentimes what I have experienced is it's not this lightning bolt experience that just totally shifts and transforms someone. It's more of a soft, kind of gentle knowing and understanding that tends to rise up. And that happens through conversation. It also happens through different exercises. A large part of my training as an end-of-life doula was around grief work. And so I did my own in order to be present for others without bringing in my own grief, because we all have grief. And so much of what we do as we tend to our own lives is we examine our own relationship with our grief, just like we examine our relationship with our joy. They have to be equal. And one of the I would say simply profound exercises that I did when I was training to become a doula was just a process called befriending your grief. And it was in a circle. We sat in a circle, and we got to just really share with each other and talk about, what does grief feel like for me today, right? Because it changes every single day. And how does that affect my joy today? And how does my joy feel today? And, it's just a process, it's a practice. So it feels very similar to anything else that we do on a daily basis when we check in around our own well-being. So I hope that answers any questions around end-of-life doulas. Did I miss anything, or does anybody have any questions around doula work that I might not have covered? Okay. Oh yeah, Allie.
Oh, sorry, Lisa, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wonder, how would one find a doula in their area? Is there a directory or?
Yes, that's such a great question, and you're reminding me that I actually forgot a big part of it, which is why our doulas needed. And the answer to that is because with medical care, as we know, our medical teams oftentimes don't have time to really sit with us and to support us emotionally. even if they're phenomenal, and a lot of times they do that, but they do it, sometimes in these little small amounts, when in reality we need much more. We need more emotional support than that. And even on hospice care, the hospice team, hospice is fantastic. I am the biggest fan of hospice on the planet. My dad got sick in 2018 and he was on hospice for 8 weeks, and I was his caregiver. But I worked right alongside with this amazing team of hospice individuals. But, and a lot of people don't know this either, but with hospice, the nurse comes in every day, but she's there for 15 minutes. And then the CNA comes in and they're there for 30 minutes, 3 times a week. And then they're gone. And so it's just a whole lot of time where there aren't medical people attending. And so that is really the whole reason that doulas came to be in the first place, is that people needed a lot more care than that. And not necessarily medical care, but, emotional care and spiritual care. And so at this point, one of the biggest roadblocks for doula work is that we are not currently covered by Medicare, and hospice is. And so any kind of doula work that happens is private pay. And so we need to be hired by the family, which is also the situation with any kind of care that's outside of hospice, is all private pay. So it feels like doula work is kind of at the beginning of this road that's just going to open up. And part of the reason for that is because we have a huge number of our population that will be moving into what's considered senior years in the next 5 to 10 years. And we just don't have enough care for our senior age demographic. And so my hope is that at some point Medicare will cover palliative care and doula work, and that will be part of a hospice team. And at that point, it would be really wonderful to have doulas work hand in hand with medical teams. That is not the case right now. And so it's actually tricky to find, to your point, Allie, it's not always easy to find an end-of-life doula. The same friend that I already mentioned, Michael Hebb, actually started a directory that is called EOL. Gosh, I should know this. EOL.com. I think I'll double check on it and when we send the email, but it's end of life. It's an end of life directory, and he has like 400 practitioners on this directory, and they range from, it's a lot of end of life doulas. It's a lot of holistic practitioners, all sorts of stuff like that. And so he has a directory, and then there are several Facebook groups that you can be a part of. I'm a part of a lot of probably 5 different end-of-life doula Facebook groups. And so you can kind of just, search for a Facebook group for doula work, and you can say that you're interested and give your location, and then they'll connect you with any doulas that are in that area. And it's actually really efficient. It's kind of amazing because the administrator will come on and say, we have a request for a doula in New Jersey, and then all the doulas in New Jersey will pop on, and then they just kind of, it's a referral system. So I feel like that's going to grow too. So we're at the beginning, but it does feel huge. It's like this beginning, but it's like this grassroots wildfire. Like, I can't tell you how many times people ask about becoming an end-of-life doula. I get so many people that reach out and they say, oh, I want to do that. How do I learn? How do I get started? So it does feel like it's beginning, and it's just going to grow and grow and become bigger and better. Lisa,
right.
did you have something?
Yeah, and my related question is, generally when people look for a doula, kind of at what point in their journey, do people generally look for one, and when should they look for one?
Yeah, yeah, really good questions. It kind of depends on the person, and I really believe that it has a lot to do with their relationship around their own death, right? So the people who are more comfortable with, they've done a lot of processing around their own grief. They know, they have this idea that, yeah, we're all going to die someday. It tends to bring this really obscure, huge thing out of the distance and closer in, and it just feels more loving. It's not so damn scary. It's, we are now embodying it and it's part of us. And so some people, the minute that they find out that they might have a diagnosis, that they are sick in the moment, and even though that doesn't mean that death is any closer, they have decided it's time to get their affairs in order. They want to involve their family. Maybe their family's not so open to it. And so they hire a doula right then and there in that moment. And I've seen it where families will sit around the table with their loved one who's been diagnosed, and together they will do advance directives so that there's no big surprise for anybody. Everybody kind of knows what to expect. Those people who are going to be the executors of the estate get to kind of have not a huge say. It's not about that. It's really about the person who has hired the doula, that their wishes are respected. But it's more just opening these lines of dialogue so that we can, people can talk about it. My dad, I think he was pretty typical, but he was just like, would not talk about it. Like, it was the biggest elephant in the room. And we're like, Dad, can we talk about it? And he just didn't want to. He just was not comfortable with it. He had never had an opportunity ever in his life. He was 84 years old. And I remember he had friends, really dear friends, that came to visit him. And they asked him my dad had a Corvette that he used to show in these car shows. It was like his thing. It was his baby. And they asked if they could have one of his Corvette posters when he was gone. And I probably shouldn't say this because it's going to go on YouTube. Cut this part out, Allie. But after they left, my dad was like, could you believe that? Like, they are asking me for stuff. I'm still here. And I said, Dad, I know, but I actually appreciate it because I don't know what to do with all your stuff. So can we just talk about it? And he was just like, oh, no. He just didn't want to talk about it at all. He was so offended. So, here we are, these two extremes, right? My dad, who doesn't want to talk about it at all, and his daughter, who does grief work and is an end-of-life doula. And so, we are all, as our journey with grief and death is as unique and individual as we all are. And we get to honor that. That's a really cool thing, actually, that we all get to come at it in our own way. So Lisa, some people hire really early on. They have a doula help them with a lot of the logistics. They have the doula teach them how to have this dialogue, teach their families how to have this dialogue. And then other people, they don't hire a doula until their loved one is actively dying. I was hired by a family, and it was because they loved they loved their mom and grandma. She was 98 years old, and she was literally the matriarch of this family. They kind of like worshiped her. She was just, they loved and adored her. And they were there with her the whole time she was at the end of life. They would lay by her in bed. They were so loving. She felt very supported. But at the very end, they didn't want any part of it, but they also didn't want her to die alone. And so they hired me to be there with her. And so I was, and it was beautiful. And that's the other thing that we have, as doulas, we are trained. And I have been trained this from day one, and we do a lot of different processes and exercises around this. But that is that as a doula, it is not my job to have an opinion. It is not my job to judge. It's not my job to try to guide anything that I think is the right way, because that is not my place. My place is to show up as a neutral presence, and I am there to support the person at the end of life as well as their family as much as I can. And so, I felt like it was an incredibly beautiful thing that they did for her, because they knew that they were not capable and they were not interested in being there with her at the end. So, another thing that I have done, so once I got all my doula stuff done, and I realized even more so that there is such a need for this conversation, that I started this symposium that Allie spoke about, and it's called everpresence.org. And we started in 2018, and it was literally a community project where we invited people from all walks of life to talk about grief and death in their own words and in their own experiences. And we had physicians, we had family caregivers, we had a suicide survivor, we just had all different, we tried to cover every single topic. And people just shared their experience. And the whole idea behind that was just that if we can figure out how to listen to other people share their experiences, and those people who aren't really willing to talk about it might learn how to do that. They might feel a little bit more inclined. And it really is about creating safe space. Because if we feel safe, then we're oftentimes a lot more able to experience these different things. So we did a symposium in 2018, and my background before this was that I was the director of marketing for a nonprofit organization. So we're marketing this event, and people would go, "Now, so hold on, let me just see if I get this right. So you want people to come and listen to other people talk about death. That's your symposium." And I was like, "Yes, exactly." And they're just like, "Yeah, so of course it was not a hugely popular event, but we did have 60 people show up at the very first one, and we had 120 people show up at the next one. And then we were scheduled for August of 2020 for the third one, which obviously got canceled. But the cool thing is that we have been approved for funding to create an online video series of individuals giving these presentations. So we're in the process of creating those right now. So if you follow everpresence.org, or if you sign up for any of my newsletters, I'll keep you in the loop on that. But it really is just, because death touches us all, it's people from all walks of life who are sharing their experiences and hopefully creating safety and trust around discussing these topics. Yeah. So, any other questions or comments before we move on? No? Okay. All right. Well, so as I have really dedicated the last, 5 years of my life to end of life work, I have come across different teachers and different philosophies that have really resonated for me and that I find to be incredibly powerful. And one of them is a man named Francis Weller, and he wrote this book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And one of the things that I think I mentioned that one of the most powerful things that I learned as I was training to become an end-of-life doula was how to get in touch with my own grief, and how, in so doing, how that just truly has opened me up to be a happier, more joyful, more alive person. That's the most shocking part of this grief work, is that is the end result. I remember when I was training to become a doula, and I did a mindful caregiver course at a place in San Francisco that was called the Zen Hospice Project. And it was started by a man named Frank Ostaseski, who during the early 80s in San Francisco, he was not medically trained, but he would walk down the streets of San Francisco and he would care for men who were dying of AIDS. And he got so tired of changing diapers behind City Hall that he opened a hospice. And it was a small Victorian home in San Francisco, but he was able to care for about 12 people at the end of life, and he could help them die with dignity. And he wrote a really powerful book, and the part of what they did at this place was they did training, and they did, it was called a mindful caregiver. So I flew to San Francisco and I did a mindful caregiver certification course. And to my shock and dismay, about 80% of what they taught us in this course, and I was super, super irritated, was self-care. And I'm like, I am not here to learn about freaking self-care. I'm here to learn how to care for others, right? I'm here for you to teach me how to be mindful in my caring for others. So let's just get through this self-care stuff and let's just move on. And, you know, it was a huge, huge wake-up call for me. And that is that we are not able and capable to care for others until and unless we care for ourselves first and foremost. And so one of the powerful things that was taught, and I carry this over into all different scenarios now, but one person shared with us that he did a door frame approach. And what he meant by that was that anytime he was showing up to support someone, and I mean, this could work for any single one of us any day of the week, but it takes some courage. And that is that he would, when he got to a door, rather than just rush in and, you know, be there for somebody else, which how many of us have had somebody come and be there for us and literally like throw up their whatever on us because they feel this need to do it, which I have done. I have done this before. So this was a powerful exercise for me. But what it is before we rush in and fix and care for people, we stop at the door frame and we look at this door frame and we check in and we say, how is my grief today? How am I today? Because if I haven't tended to my own grief and I walk through that door to take care of somebody else, my grief is going to spill out all over them. And they don't deserve that. Nobody deserves that. So instead, it's a pause and it's a check-in. And if I feel that I have not tended to my grief today, then I need to turn around and I need to leave. Because I have to take care of my own emotions and my own inner world before I can ever show up for anybody else. So that was really powerful. And I think of that often if I'm even just going to visit a friend, if I'm meeting someone for coffee, if I'm having a conversation with one of my kids, before I walk through that door, I got to check in. Because I have to, just like I learned in this mindful caregiving course, I have to tend to myself first before I can ever show up for somebody else. So, which leads me to Frances Weller. So Frances Weller is a man who, he's actually a psychologist by trade, but he works in Bolinas, California, which is also the Bay Area. He works for the Commonweal Health Center, and he's a grief counselor. And Bolinas is this little community. It's a really pretty tight-knit little community. And part of his great work, and he's been doing this for years and years and years, is something that he calls grief hygiene. And the way it works is that once a week, everybody gets together and they sit in circle and they share their grief with each other. Some people have a high amount of grief and they're crying and they're really moving that grief, and other people don't, and so they're more supportive of that. But what he has done and what they do on a weekly basis, and like I said, it's like he calls it grief hygiene because he feels like it's just like taking a shower. It's just like tending to our physical body, but instead we are tending to our grief. And in so doing, the way he describes it is that by expanding our capacity for grief, we are also expanding our capacity for joy. And that those two literally go hand in hand. And I just want to read to you, just really quick, in his words, the way that he talks about it, because it's just, I'm not going to read much because you can easily get this book, and it's just so, it's so good. You've read it, Allie, right? Yeah. Have you read it, Erin, too? Yeah. A little bit, yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm not completely done with it, but I've gotten, yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a snippet book, you know, because the concepts are really so incredibly powerful that you can just take them like a snippet at a time. Sorry, my book literally fell apart today, so I'm trying to find the little section that I wanted to read to you because it's in his own words.
I was going to question your use of literally because many people say it now and they don't really mean it literally. But you
know, it's pretty literal. And I marked it today and then I lost the other part of it. Okay, well, I'm just going to redo this part. Hey, where did I put? Oh, here it is. It's over here. The other part to the book. So, so this is what he says. This is what Francis Willer says. He says, grief is always in some way accompanying us. There are times when the presence of sorrow is acute, when a partner dies, a home turns into ash in a fire, a marriage dissolves, and we find ourselves alone. These seasons in our lives are intense and require a prolonged time to honor what the soul needs, to fully digest the grief. Sorrow is a sustained note in the song of being alive. To be human is to know loss in its many forms. This should not be seen as a depressing truth. Acknowledging this reality enables us to find our way into the grace that lies hidden in sorrow. We are most alive at the threshold between loss and revelation. Every loss ultimately opens the way for a new encounter. So, yeah, I'm wondering how you feel about that idea. If you have any thoughts or anything that's coming up for you that you could maybe share. I'm wondering if this is a new concept or if this is something that you have already considered or that you've spent time with.
I'll just say a few words.
Yeah.
I hadn't really thought about grief being a continuing part of who we are. I lost my parents 7 years ago, and together, well, 5 weeks apart. And that was one of the hardest periods of my life. And I felt like once I grieved that, and I started feeling okay about that, then I was okay, and I didn't have that grief anymore. But I still do. I still, and that listening to you really brings it home that there are still times when I grieve them, I miss them. But I hadn't thought about that I carry it with me all the time.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I had a similar experience, you know. I don't know what my naive little mind had in store or what I had planned, but somehow I thought that I was going to become an end of life doula and I was going to take care of other people and that I knew everything that there was to know about grief. I don't know that I really believed that, but somehow there was a part of me that felt like I knew that I could manage grief now, right? Because I'd done all this training. And then my dad died. And it was the first time, you know, I haven't lost a parent. And even though I had lost a brother, it's the first time I'd had somebody close to me die as an adult. And I don't know what I thought. I had this idea. I think I was just, I had fear that was kind of keeping my grief far away from me. And even though I had done these practices around befriending my grief, I hadn't really fully understood this idea of grief hygiene. And that is that if we work with it every single day, that it doesn't build up in us and that we're able to really manage it, even though it still hurts and even though it's heartbreaking and we're still so sad. But I was so devastated by my dad's death. And it was a big, again, it was another just big wake up call for me, which is that's okay. You know, I get to be devastated by my dad's death. And like you, Maureen, you know, he's been gone for 2 years and I still miss him. And I still have days where I laugh because I think of him and he was really funny. And then other days I still cry when I think about him. So, but it's different. It circles back around in a different way. And I believe that I am becoming much more in tune with my grief that I hold every single day. And in so doing, I'm able to really hold space for it and honor it. So that it's not quite so devastating, you know? I still have my mom. She's 84. She's going to die. And she's healthy right now, but, you know, I hope that I've learned a little bit about myself and my relationship with my grief so that I can create that space of honoring and also that place of hygiene, which is a network of people who can be there for me and who aren't totally freaked out by my grief, right? I don't know how many of you have experienced that, but I had many friends who were just like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, you know, which is sweet and kind, but that doesn't do shit for my grief, you know, it's just still me feeling really sad. And so that, again, it's learning how to support one another and it's learning how to ask for what I need for my grief. And sometimes that's just, hey, is it okay if you come over and I just cry with you? Is that okay? You know, and having our circle know how to do those things and know how to support us in those things. It's really quite profound. And it's interesting to me that however long there have been human beings on earth that have been dying, that we still have this, right? That we're still learning how to do this. And I know there are many cultures who know how to do this well. And they know how to honor people at the end of life. They know how to do death ceremony and all the stuff that they just know how to do, but we don't, you know, we don't do that. So, yeah, any other thoughts or comments? Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah, I think what's been most interesting to me, so, you know, I had my breast cancer diagnosis, and then that year my husband died unexpectedly from a heart attack.
Wow.
So I had the grief around, you know, getting my mind around the diagnosis and treatment and all of the what ifs you think about. And then when my husband died, it's a whole different type of thing. And more than anything, what I've learned over these last 3 going on 4 years is about grief, because I didn't really know much about it before. Like, you know, you heard of the stages of grief, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not linear. But I truly hadn't been close enough to it to have any sense of how long and how random, you know, the different stages and things could be. So getting exposure in the various settings and hearing the conversations and the different types of resources, thinking, exercises, ways to approach things has been really helpful. Even if I don't physically engage in those practices, just knowing that there's, you know, it's complicated, it's long lasting, it's not just me. And if I decide, there are other things I can do and draw on. So it's like opening a whole new world, a whole new education. You lived your life, for instance, as a teacher, and then you're forced to be an engineer. It just like forces you to go down this path because it's there and that's what you have to deal with.
Yeah.
My perspective.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's changing. It's something that's so unfamiliar to us, right? And so that's really his point, is that if we can start to look at our losses that we have all the time and honoring those losses and creating space in ourselves for just loss and just sadness, that it is a primer for then how to deal with this grief. And like to your point, Lisa, it is so unpredictable. We never know. You know, it's a daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute experience that we are not going to, we're not going to know what's going to hit us before it comes. We're just not going to know. And that's another, this is another more recent thing that he wrote, and it's actually a download from his website. It's like $10, and then you can download it, and then I printed it out, but it's called, he actually wrote this right before COVID hit, and it's called In the Absence of the Ordinary, and it's essays in a time of uncertainty. So the timing of it is just incredible. But he speaks a lot to that, you know, that it's all the unknown. None of us know when we're going to die. Any of us can step off a curb and get hit by a car. We just don't know. But to be able to create this kind of support system where, so that if it did happen tomorrow, you know, our people and our loved ones would be able to have a little bit of an idea of what kinds of things they could do. So, yeah. So it's 7:34. So I think what we'll do now is just move into, it's an exercise that helps us it helps kind of guide us to a place of befriending our grief. And it's a brief exercise and it's pretty simple. But if you're open to it, then we can kind of experiment with it together. Okay, and it doesn't take too long. This is a writing exercise, and I approach it in 2 steps. So I call this exercise grief sheets, just sheets of paper. So these are my grief sheets. And I actually have a notebook that I call my grief sheets notebook. And it's not the same as journaling because it's not so mental. It is more me exploring. So, and the other part to it, which actually can precede that depending on the day. So grief sheets and sitting down and the way that part works is, I'll explain this part first, but then there's this other part also, if needed. So my grief sheets, I sit down and we're going to do this all together. But I take 3 minutes and I connect to my breath with my eyes closed and I clear whatever I can. Sometimes I can't clear anything, but it's just a matter of just being still and being with my breath for 3 minutes. So I'll tell you all the steps first and then we'll do it. And then I ask myself, how is my grief today? Now, some days my grief is so enormous that there's not a chance that I'm going to be able to write about it. It's just too big. It's not something that I can connect to. Some days I can, some days I can't. And there is never any right, wrong, good or bad. There's never any judgment around any of this. All of it is meant to provide some ease and flow around what we go through every day. So on some days I can, how is my grief today? I can start writing. And it all just comes and it just kind of, it's not a formulated thing. It just comes. On other days when my grief is too big, I ask myself, if I can't go there, I ask, where is the oxygen? And what I mean by that is that we all know situations in our lives that help us breathe better, that help us breathe easier. It might be a person who tends to walk into a room and you can feel the oxygen. You can breathe better because they're there. They bring some light and some lightness with them. Other times it's just me sitting in front of an open window and I can literally breathe better. It's oxygen. Sometimes it's me going for a really brisk walk, and that's the oxygen. So if I'm not in a place to be able to connect with my grief, then I connect with the oxygen instead. And what happens is that when I'm able to get the flow back and I'm able to breathe and I'm connected to, and I've moved some stuff, then 9 times out of 10, I can go back and say, how's my grief today? And I can connect there. So we'll try this together. If anybody, you know what you're dealing with today. And if you would like to explore how is my grief today? And here's the writing process. And this is the part that's really important, is that this is not a mental or a cerebral thing. It is not me talking about my day. It's really me just letting whatever comes out come out, right? And it takes just a little bit of practice, but some people call it flow writing. I've heard it called subconscious writing, where you just start writing and it doesn't really matter what, you're not too attached to what's coming out on the other side of the pen. You're just writing. And it is astonishing how much moves in that process, because it's a physiological thing. We are connecting our brain, but we're also connecting our heart, and we are just letting it come out. And it is a form of grief hygiene. And so it just requires a little tiny bit of practice, but let's do it together. Allie, do we have time, do you think? Okay, we'll just spend like maybe 5-8 minutes at the most, because I do want to have some time at the end for questions if people have any questions. Okay, so I'm going to watch the clock, and let's just start right now by taking 3 minutes to just connect to our breath. So take a deep, slow inhale and feel your breath move into your nose, down your throat, and into your lungs, and feel your lungs expand. And exhale. And just try to really feel the motion of your breath as it moves in slowly and then back out slowly. When we breathe in and out through our nose, It's actually a somatic exercise that has a soothing effect on the entire body. So just relaxing the shoulders a little bit, loosening up the neck, releasing the jaw. Just really relishing in that beautiful ease of breath. If it feels comfortable, you can place one hand on your heart and one hand just below, just between your rib cage. This is also just very, very soothing. It's very calming. And as you allow your breath to slow, this is a really supportive way to hold space for yourself. And let's just do 3 more breaths. And very slowly and gently come back to our circle, back to our group. And when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes. And so now, just go to your notebook and with your pen and ask either, how is my grief today? Or, where is the oxygen? And we'll just take 2 minutes to write. And we'll do just like 30 more seconds, just in case you're in a flow and you want to just finish up that thought process. Okay. So, how did that feel? Anybody want to share? You don't have to tell us what you wrote. Some days I write one word and that's enough. Allie?
Yeah, I found it hard a little bit to like I know that I've been having a lot of grief lately and feeling that, but then when I was put on the spot almost, it was like, I feel fine. What's happening?
Right.
And then I couldn't remember exactly what you said on where is the oxygen. So I went back to the grief and I started with just being tired and just I think that's kind of where it's all stemming from for me lately, is feeling not able to do everything that I want to be able to do. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah. And that's so honest, right? I love your honesty, Allie, that we do tend to make it all okay. You know, what grief? I don't have any grief today. Oh, my grief is great. My grief is great, you know? And it does take just a little bit of practice. And so the oxygen part of it can be, I'm not even going to do the grief part today because I need to move. I need to move. Like sitting here and writing is not going to work. I need to go outside. I need a breath. Or it can be anything, you know, it can be I need to dance or I need to meditate or I need to sleep or whatever it is. We don't always get to the grief every single day. And it does take some practice. But what you got to, Allie, even in 2 minutes, is profound. And the end point of this, of all of this, is self-care. And so it's being able to say, where is my grief today? Which leads me to, what do I need today? You know, what do I need today? And if I'm tired, I need some sleep today. Maybe I feel like I need to cry and I need somebody to sit with me when I cry. And maybe my grief is not super active today. And literally, it isn't me just defending it. My grief really is fine today. I don't have a lot of active grief in my body today. I feel balanced and I feel good. So it's not, so grief sheets is not always this outpouring of, it is that on occasion, but it is it is a new way of being honest with where we're at every single day. And that's why it's grief hygiene, because it's like hopping in the shower and just, you know, showering off whatever's going on and making ourselves aware of it so that we really become much better at asking for what we need and giving ourselves what we need. And then also doing that for others after. So, yeah, Marie.
Yeah, this was an interesting exercise for me. I retired at the end of December, and so I've had this wonderful celebration of life and time and ability. And this surprised me to realize when I worked through this that I'm actually grieving the loss of my job. Not that I lost my job, because that's what I worked towards. But after 34 years of that being everything that you've done,
Yes,
there's a part of me that misses that.
for sure.
And I hadn't really connected to that until now.
Wow. Yeah, and what a beautiful space for honoring, right? To just honor that, yeah, you know, I devoted my whole life to that. And that is why that's why we decided to call this a legacy fueled life. Because by doing these kind of simple but profound, I'm just realizing how dark it is in my house. I think it got really dark while we were on this call. Looks like I'm in the dark, but we're almost done anyway. So it is these little huge awarenesses that allow us this complete honoring of our lives, right? And that is what our legacy is. That is what legacy is that by being able to honor these parts of ourselves and these parts of our lives, um, it helps us become really aware of those things that really matter to us. And then we're able to focus on the things that we really want to do with our lives and the legacies that we want to leave, right? So these are not small little topics. These are big, but I use this word a lot. I use these two words together, which is just, they are simply profound, which is that they're really simple in process. They're quite simple, but the places that we're able to go within ourselves and the ways that we are able to connect to the parts of ourselves that are so deeply meaningful are so profound. And they're really they're life enriching. So that's the greatest surprise, right, of end of life work, is that by talking about death, it actually makes our lives so much better. I had somebody that I worked with on our symposium said, you don't get pregnant by talking about sex, and you're not going to die by talking about death. In fact, you're going to live. It's going to create so much more life by being able to have these conversations. So we just have a few minutes left. Anybody else want to offer anything, or are there any questions that have come up while we're moving through this stuff? Katie, I'd love to check in with you. How are you feeling about all this?
Yeah, I'm just processing. And actually, the thought that I was just having is I'm glad that Ali mentioned this maybe posted to YouTube, right? Because I think I need to hear some of what you've said again.
Nice. Yeah, and we'll also, like I said, we'll send out an email with the links and the books and stuff that I've talked about, because what I am sharing with you, I did not create. A lot of it came from Francis Weller's book, but also Frank Ostaseski also wrote a book that I am completely in love with, and it's called The 5 Invitations, and it's what he learned about life by he sat with over 2,000 people while they died. And then he turned it into this, Invitations for Life book, and it's really inspiring and it's really good. And it is, a lot of that is grief processing too. So even though I didn't develop any of this, it is pretty new to talk about it. This is a topic that is not really everywhere. So you're all kind of cutting edge to even be a part of this conversation. So thank you so much again for being here and for being so open and so willing to experiment with some of these exercises. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mindy. I don't want to cut anyone off. Charlie, did you have any final comments before I kind of close this up?
Well, I did write down some things, and it kind of surprised me. I wouldn't put it in the category of grief, because when I think of grief, I think of pain, deep pain. But what crossed my mind was more sorrow about the potential changes in my family, because I'm sort of the hub of my family, and I see that the interaction maybe is going to change, and there may not be the large family gatherings, and that makes me sad, but I don't know if that's grief.
Yeah. And we don't even have to define it, right? It's like sadness, grief, sorrow. Sometimes we have tears and we don't even know why. And all of that is hygiene. It's all just tending to things that we didn't even. I love that you said, both of you said, all three of you really said that you were surprised by what came up for you in this exercise. And that's part of what makes it so powerful, is that these are not thoughts that we're carrying in the front of our brain, right? These are thoughts that we're kind of keeping back here, and we're not really tending to them. But by tending to them, it helps us to know where our heart is. It helps us to know where our emotions are. It's incredibly empowering. And it doesn't need, we don't need to define it, and we don't need to make it right, wrong, good, or bad. It just is. So I love that you shared that and that that was your experience. Yeah. Lisa, did you have anything before we wrap up?
No, because unlike probably any day for the last month, I really didn't have any grief today. I was in an exceptionally content mood. I wouldn't even say happy, content. So, how is my grief today? None. And I'm not preoccupied, stressed, or frustrated, which almost any day over the last month, one of those words would have applied.
I love it.
And I just feel delighted with a new recipe I tried that I look forward to making, and my plans for gardening stuff. And
Love
that
it. Love it.
I'm not
Beautiful.
going to pull up grief that I didn't feel, considering I've had plenty of other crap before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you guys all just we all gave an example of where we are in these unique places because it's our own. It's as unique to us as we are, and it changes every day and sometimes multiple times throughout the day. So, yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you. Thanks to every one of you. Thank you so much for participating and being here. I love
Yes,
you.
thank you. And please, like Mindy said, this is new, and it is new for Image Reborn, and it's not something that, we've talked about grief and gratitude a lot at retreats, and that's a common theme. But if as things are coming up and you start having questions, of course, reach out to Mindy with any of the questions relating to her work. But if you have thoughts about retreats and things that really stood out to you, we love that feedback. It really helps us in developing our agendas and how we hold retreats. So, please let us know if this is something that you feel personally connected to and it resonates for you, because that will help us in guiding this conversation, and especially, in this virtual world, and as we're fine-tuning things that way too. So we'd love to hear any of your thoughts as they come up over the next week or so.
Yeah, and don't hesitate to email me. That my email will be on there as well. I also love to connect with you. And Death Cafe, nice. Yes, we have a Death Cafe here in Salt Lake City too. Death Cafes are wonderful places as well. Yeah, very good.
Okay, and if there's nothing else to say, then have a good evening, all of you, and we'll see you soon. Good night.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. Good night.